Every hotel has a story, but this one had a legend. They said room 13A didn't exist, at least, not anymore. It was sealed decades ago after something unspeakable happened. Guests who asked about it were told the same rehearsed line. There's no room 13A here, sir. But last night, the night clerk swears he saw the door open. And worse, someone stepped out. Boston in the fall always had a particular mood, a kind of haunted charm that clung to the air like mist. Ethan Calloway felt it the moment he stepped off the train at South Station. The air was cold, the streets glistening from a day-long drizzle, and the city lights seemed dimmer than usual, blurred in a fog that rolled in from the harbor. For most travelers, Boston was about history, good food, and architecture. But for Ethan, it was about stories, the kind people didn't talk about openly. He pulled his worn leather messenger bag over his shoulder and adjusted his scarf, glancing at the directions on his phone. The hotel was only a 10-minute walk away. The Ashmore Hotel. To anyone else, it was just another luxury spot tucked between old brick buildings, a relic of the city's gilded age, now refurbished for the wealthy. But Ethan wasn't here for the chandeliers or the wine list. He was here because of something whispered on obscure forums and buried in old newspaper archives. Room 13A. For over 40 years, guests and staff alike had spoken of it, though rarely by name. The story went that the room didn't exist anymore. That after an incident in the late 70s, the owners sealed it permanently, removing it from the floor plan. But people still heard things, knocks, voices, even movement, coming from where it once was. And now, there were fresh rumors. A comment on an Urban Legends blog, posted just 2 weeks ago, read, "I saw someone come out of 13A last night. Tall man. Old-fashioned suit. He didn't belong here. I swear to God it's real. Stay away from that room." Ethan lived for this kind of thing. As a freelance journalist specializing in fringe stories, he'd written about cryptids, forgotten murders, and cursed objects. But this? A sealed hotel room with sightings of impossible figures? This was different. The hotel loomed ahead as he turned the corner. The Ashmore was beautiful in a way that only century-old buildings could be. Stone facade, wrought iron balconies, massive arched windows framed with ornate detailing. Yet something about it seemed heavy, like the building itself was holding its breath. Inside, the air smelled of polish and old wood. The lobby was warmly lit, with towering ceilings, a grand staircase, and an oversized chandelier. A pianist played softly in the corner, the notes bouncing off marble walls. It would have been comforting if Ethan didn't know what he was looking for. He approached the front desk. "Good evening," the clerk said with a practiced smile. Her name tag read Clara. "Checking in." "Yes. Calloway. Ethan Calloway." She typed quickly, then slid a key card across the counter. "Room 1204. Elevators to your left." Ethan didn't move. "Before I head up, could I ask you something?" "About the 13th floor." Her fingers froze on the keyboard. Just for a second, but long enough for him to notice. "What about it?" "I read that some older buildings skipped it. Superstition, right? But I heard this one had a room, 13A. Her smile didn't falter, but the warmth behind it drained. "There's no room 13A here, sir. The 12th floor leads directly to the 14th. "That's strange," Ethan said lightly. "Because on old blueprints, there's, 'Enjoy your stay, Mr. Calloway.'" Her voice cut sharp, final. It was a dismissal. Ethan took the key and nodded, playing along, but he'd seen that look before. The one people wore when they were lying but couldn't say why. The elevator chimed softly as it opened. Ethan stepped inside, pressing the button for 12. He watched the numbers ascend. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, no 13. Yet when the doors opened, Ethan felt a strange tug, like the floor wasn't quite right. The hallway was luxurious but quiet, almost unnaturally so. Thick carpet muted his footsteps. A long row of doors stretched on, each identical, until, there, between 12 and 14, at the very end of the hall, something was off. At first, it looked like nothing, just a section of wallpapered wall. But when he squinted, he saw faint outlines beneath the surface. Rectangular, door-shaped, and carved faintly into the paint, barely visible unless you knew to look. 13A. His chest tightened. That night, Ethan set up his recording equipment, a small audio recorder, a GoPro mounted by the window. He wasn't staying here just to sleep. He needed evidence. At 3 a.m., the hotel was silent. Then came the knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Ethan froze. They weren't coming from his door. They were coming from behind the wall. He grabbed his recorder and approached, heart thundering in his ears. "Hello," he whispered. No response. He pressed his ear to the wall. No more knocking. But something else. Breathing. Slow. Steady. Inhumanly calm. And coming from the other side. Cliffhanger. Ethan jerked back, nearly dropping the recorder. The wall was cold under his fingers, but the breath he'd heard wasn't just inside his head. Someone, or something, was inside room 13A. Ethan didn't sleep. The breathing he heard behind the wall lingered in his mind like a stain. He replayed the audio recording over and over, hoping he'd imagined it. But the sound was there, faint, measured, unmistakable. By morning, the hotel was bustling again. Guests came and went, dragging luggage and laughing in the lobby, unaware that an impossible room might be just a few feet away from where they'd slept. Ethan needed help. He called Natalie. Natalie Pierce was the only person he trusted for something like this. A photographer who specialized in the macabre, she'd worked with him on countless strange assignments, abandoned asylums, forgotten tunnels, the occasional midnight cemetery shoot. She had an eye for details most people missed and a patience for his obsessions. "You're telling me you heard breathing through a wall," Natalie said as they rode the elevator that afternoon. "I know how it sounds." "No, you don't," she replied flatly, but her camera was already around her neck. They stepped out onto the 12th floor. Natalie scanned the hallway. "Which wall?" Ethan pointed toward the far end. She crouched, running her fingers along the wallpaper. "This doesn't match the rest," she said. "It's newer. Someone redid this section." Ethan nodded. "Look closer." Natalie squinted. And then she saw it. The faint etching, almost invisible under the paint. 13A, her face went pale. Holy shit. They didn't just seal it. They tried to erase it. They worked quickly. Natalie photographed every angle. The carving, the slight unevenness of the wall, even the faint impressions in the carpet where a threshold used to be. That's when a voice startled them. "Excuse me. Can I help you?" The hotel manager stood a few feet away, a tall, stiff man in a suit that looked as old as the building. His expression was polite, but his eyes were sharp. "Just appreciating the architecture," Ethan said casually. "This section isn't for guests," the manager replied. "Please return to your room." Natalie ignored him and snapped another photo. The man's voice sharpened. "Delete those." "Excuse me. Delete the photos." "Now." Natalie smirked. "Why?" "It's just a wall." The manager stepped closer. "Because I said so. And because some things are better left unseen." The way he said it made Ethan's skin crawl. They left, but not before Natalie whispered. "What the hell was that about?" "Covering something up," Ethan said. That evening, they met with a retired janitor named Charles who'd worked at the Ashmore in the 70s. He agreed to meet them at a nearby diner. When Ethan mentioned room 13A, the old man's hand trembled as he stirred his coffee. "You don't want to go poking around there," Charles said. "They sealed it for a reason." "What happened?" Natalie asked. Charles stared at his cup. "It wasn't an accident. A man checked in. Henry Blackwell. Never checked out. That's all I'll say. Never checked out." Charles looked up, his eyes suddenly hard. "They sealed the room the day after. And you'd do well to leave it alone." But Ethan couldn't leave it alone. At 2:43 a.m., Ethan woke to a soft creaking sound. He glanced at the clock. Natalie was asleep on the couch, her camera bag at her feet. The sound came again, from the hallway. Quietly, he slipped out of bed and opened the door. The corridor was empty. And yet, at the very end of the hall, where there had been nothing but a bricked-up wall hours ago, there was now a door. It looked like every other room door. Dark wood, brass handle. And on it, engraved in faded numbers, 13A. Ethan's mouth went dry. The door was slightly ajar. And from the darkness beyond, something whispered his name. Ethan stepped forward, his pulse hammering in his ears. Natalie was still asleep inside. He wanted to wake her. He wanted to run. But before he could move, the door creaked wider, like it had been waiting for him all along. The door was waiting. Ethan couldn't explain it, but standing there, staring at that slightly open door, he felt like prey. Like something on the other side had been listening to him this whole time, and now it had finally decided to answer. "Natalie," he whispered over his shoulder. No response. He glanced back at the room. She was still asleep, one arm draped over her camera bag, oblivious. Ethan turned back to the door. It wasn't open much, just enough to see the sliver of darkness beyond. His hand shook as he pushed it. The hinges groaned softly, like the room hadn't been opened in years. The smell hit first. A mix of mildew, dust, and something else, metallic, almost like old coins. The room looked untouched. The wallpaper was yellowed and peeling in places. Heavy drapes blocked the windows, leaving the space cloaked in shadows. The carpet was outdated, patterned in a mustard and brown geometric design that screamed 1970s. Ethan stepped inside. His shoes left faint prints in the dust. Natalie stirred awake moments later, and when she saw him disappearing through the doorway, she bolted up. "Ethan, over here," he called softly. Natalie's eyes widened when she saw the open door. Oh my God, they both stood inside room 13A. The layout was standard for a hotel room: bed, nightstand, dresser, armchair. But everything felt wrong. The bed was perfectly made. Crisp sheets, folded corners. But the fabric was discolored with age, untouched for decades. Natalie raised her camera and started snapping photos. The shutter clicks echoed unnaturally in the silence. "Look at this," Ethan said. On the dresser sat a guest ledger, its leather cover brittle and cracking. He opened it carefully. The last entry, Mr. H. Blackwell, checked in, December 14th, 1978, checked out. The checked out column was blank. Natalie drifted toward a large mirror on the wall. It was old, the kind with ornate framing, but what caught her attention wasn't its design, it was the reflection. "Ethan, come here." He joined her, and his stomach dropped. The mirror reflected them, but not in real time. When Ethan waved his hand, the reflection followed, but with a delay. A 2-second lag. He stepped closer. "Is this the screen?" Natalie shook her head. "It's a mirror, but it's not reflecting us right." Then she gasped. "Ethan, look." Behind them, in the reflection, stood a man. They whipped around. No one was there. But in the mirror, the man remained. Tall, gaunt, wearing an old-fashioned suit, the kind you'd see in black and white photos. His face was pale, almost featureless, but his eyes were deep, empty pits. "Holy shit," Natalie whispered, stumbling back. Ethan's voice shook. "It's just a trick. It has to be." The man in the reflection took a step forward. But in the room, nothing moved. The door slammed shut. They both screamed. Ethan rushed to the door, yanking at the handle. It wouldn't budge. Natalie dropped her camera in panic. Open it, open it." "I'm trying." The lights flickered. The temperature plummeted. Their breaths became visible in the air. Natalie turned back to the mirror. The man was gone. But the reflection of the bed, which had been empty seconds ago, now showed someone sitting on it. She spun toward the Real bed and froze. The bed wasn't empty anymore. A figure sat there, motionless, as if it had been waiting for them all along. Natalie's scream was sharp enough to make Ethan spin around. The figure on the bed wasn't moving. It sat perfectly still, legs together, hands folded neatly on its lap. A man. He wore an old charcoal gray suit, creased but well kept, like he'd dressed for an occasion that never came. His hair was slicked back, but patchy, scalp showing through thin strands. His skin was pale, almost translucent, like candle wax stretched too thin. And his eyes, they weren't empty pits anymore. They were black, bottomless. Who are you?" Ethan's voice cracked. The man tilted his head, as if trying to remember how to respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was dry, creaky, like it hadn't been used in decades. Henry Blackwell." Natalie's knees nearly gave out. "You're on the ledger." Henry nodded slowly, as if this fact pleased him. "Yes. They said I'd only be here for one night. But the room doesn't let you leave." Ethan swallowed hard. "What happened here? Why is this room sealed?" Henry's black eyes flickered toward the mirror. "It doesn't matter. What matters is you opened the door." "We didn't. You opened it." Henry cut him off, voice suddenly sharper. "That means the room likes you." Natalie clutched Ethan's arm. "Ethan, we need to get out." They backed toward the door. Henry didn't move. "You won't make it," he said softly. Ethan yanked at the handle again. It wouldn't budge. Henry smiled faintly, a sickly curve of his lips. "You think this place obeys you? No. You belong to it now." The lights flickered violently. plunging the room in bursts of strobe-like darkness. When they came back on, Henry was gone. Where did he go? Natalie's voice was high, panicked. Forget him. Help me with the door. But before she could, her knees buckled. She groaned, grabbing her head. Natalie. She stumbled to the mirror, eyes wide in horror. Ethan, look. He joined her. The reflection was wrong again. Natalie wasn't herself in the glass. Her hair was gray. Her skin sagged, creased with deep lines. Her eyes were sunken, hollow. She looked decades older. No, 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 she sobbed, clutching her face. But in reality, she was unchanged. Then Ethan saw himself in the mirror. Older, gaunt, a shell of who he was. The lights flickered again. Henry's voice echoed from nowhere. Time doesn't move here like it does outside. It bends. It breaks. It keeps you. Natalie's breath came in sharp gasps. Ethan, I can't stay here. I can't. The room was closing in. The air felt thicker, harder to breathe. They yanked the door with all their strength, and finally, it swung open. They ran. But the hallway wasn't the same. The elegant carpeting was replaced with a dingy, threadbare rug. The wallpaper was faded, peeling. The air smelled stale, like cigarettes and mold. Where are we? Natalie whispered. Ethan's eyes landed on a newspaper lying on the floor. He picked it up with trembling hands. The headline read, Boston Globe, December 15th, 1978. Natalie's voice was barely audible. Ethan, this can't be real. Ethan's heart pounded as he whispered the only words he could find. We didn't just enter room 13A. We went back in time. Natalie reached for his hand, but before she could touch him, another door creaked open at the end of the hallway, and a familiar voice said, You can't run from the room. Ethan froze. The voice came from the end of the hallway. Henry stood there, no longer calm, no longer neatly folded into himself. His head tilted at an unnatural angle, his long arms hanging too low, like a puppet with cut strings. You can't run from the room, he repeated, his voice echoing strangely, as if more than one version of him was speaking at once. Natalie pulled at Ethan's arm. Move. Now. They sprinted. Every hallway looked the same. Each door they passed bore the same faded brass numbers. 13A. They turned left. Right. It didn't matter. Every path brought them back to the same place. Henry's footsteps were slow but constant behind them. They didn't need to look back to know he was gaining. Stairs. Ethan panted, spotting an exit sign. They burst through the door and ran down. But the stairs didn't lead to the lobby. They led to another hallway. Another row of 13A doors. Natalie screamed. The mirrors began to appear next, on the walls, the ceilings, even the floor. Ethan caught glimpses of himself as they ran. But in each reflection, he was different. Older, broken, his skin sagging, his eyes hollow. In one mirror, Natalie wasn't there at all. Don't look at them, she yelled. Just keep going. But then she stumbled, falling to her knees. Ethan grabbed her, trying to pull her up. Her skin was cold. Too cold. When he looked at her face, his stomach dropped. For a split second, she looked like the Natalie in the mirror, decades older, mouth open in a silent scream. Then she blinked, and she was herself again. What's happening to us? She sobbed. Henry's voice filled the halls, coming from everywhere at once. The room chooses who it keeps. And it always keeps someone. They found a window. Without hesitation, Ethan smashed it with a chair. Cold air rushed in. A fire escape waited below. Go, he yelled. Natalie climbed through first, and Ethan followed. They descended the rickety metal stairs 2, 3 floors, until the ground rushed up beneath them. They landed hard. For a moment, they couldn't believe it. They'd made it out. The streets were quiet. Boston, as it should be. Natalie laughed breathlessly, tears streaming down her face. We're out. We're? Then she froze. Ethan turned to follow her gaze. They weren't outside. They were standing in room 13A. The wallpaper, the bed, the mirror, all of it. As if they'd never left. Natalie screamed and pounded the walls. No. No, 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 no. The mirror cracked. And where the glass split, so did her skin. Thin, jagged lines appeared across her face, glowing faintly before vanishing. She collapsed, sobbing. Henry emerged from the bathroom doorway, still in his suit, still smiling faintly. You opened the door, he said again. That means you belong to it now. The last thing Ethan saw was the mirror. But it wasn't their reflection anymore. It was two new photos on the wall, side by side. Him and Natalie, smiling stiffly, black and white, as if they'd always been there. They say room 13A doesn't exist. They say it's been sealed forever. But if that's true, then who put Ethan and Natalie's photos on that wall? What do you think really happened in that room? Did they ever escape? Or did the hotel keep them, just like it kept Henry Blackwell? And if room 13A can choose who it keeps, how many others has it taken? Sleep well tonight, and don't open any doors that shouldn't exist.